My wife left me for a millionaire and stole our savings. My name is Jake, and I'm 48 years old. For the past 20 years, I've worked as a forensic accountant. It's not a glamorous job. Most people think accountants are dull. But my work isn't about balancing books. It's about finding the hidden story in the numbers, tracing the invisible threads of money, uncovering fraud, embezzlement, and deceit. I chase shadows and ledgers, and I've seen enough human greed to last a lifetime. I've seen how quickly people can be blinded by the promise of easy money, how easily they fall for a polished lie. I just never thought the next victim would be my own wife, and that I would choose to let it happen. Sandra and I had been married for 15 years. We had 2 kids, Emily, who was 12, and David, 10. Our home was a modest but comfortable house in the suburbs with a well-tended garden and a swing set in the backyard that had seen countless hours of joyful chaos. Our life, from the outside, seemed perfectly ordinary. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I worked hard. Sandra worked part-time as a graphic designer, primarily from home, which allowed her flexibility for the kids. We saved diligently, not just for retirement, but for the kids' college funds, a safety net for any unexpected emergencies, and even a modest dream of a small cottage by the lake for our later years. Our life was stable, predictable, and, I thought, happy. I was profoundly wrong. The change in Sandra began subtly, about 6 months ago. It started with an almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor. She became restless, fidgety. She started taking more business conferences out of town, trips that extended from a weekend to 4 or 5 days. Her wardrobe saw a sudden expensive upgrade, designer labels I didn't recognize replacing her usual comfortable, practical clothes. Her makeup became heavier, her hair more styled, almost aggressively so. She started talking about ambition, about breaking free from our stagnant life, a phrase that began to grate on me. She'd bring up articles about crypto millionaires and tech startups, always with a wistful, almost resentful tone, as if our steady, secure life, the life we had built together, was nothing more than a cage, a limitation on her untapped potential. I tried to talk to her, to understand what was bothering her, to bridge the growing chasm between us, but she just brushed me off, saying I was too stuck in my ways, too cautious, too boring to understand her new vision. The word boring stung, a sharp, unfair assessment of a man who worked tirelessly to provide stability. I'd seen this pattern before, tragically often, in my line of work. The sudden shift in interests, the secretive new friends, the vague talk of grand, unprecedented opportunities, the aggressive dismissal of any caution. It's almost always the precursor to someone falling for a scam, becoming entangled in a fraudulent scheme, or worse, becoming a willing participant in one. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach, a professional instinct screaming that something was deeply wrong. I tried to access our joint investment accounts, just to confirm nothing unusual was happening. But she had already changed the passwords and removed me from online access, claiming it was for security reasons and streamlining. I let it go, trying to maintain peace, a decision I would later regret, but which would also become a critical piece of the unfolding drama. Then came the business conference in Miami. This one was different. She was gone for a full week, the longest she had ever been away. She barely called. Her texts were terse and infrequent. When she finally came back, she was a different person. Her eyes shone with a manic energy, a kind of feverish, almost wild excitement I had never seen before. She practically vibrated with some secret, thrilling knowledge. She barely looked at me, barely acknowledged the kids who rushed to hug her, eager for souvenirs and stories. She spent hours on her phone, whispering, smiling to herself, her face flushed with some private triumph. I tried again to reach her, to connect, to simply understand, but her wall was impenetrable. The next evening, she finally sat me down in the living room, the children already asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that their world was about to be irrevocably shattered. "Jake," she began, her voice unusually firm, almost rehearsed, "I've met someone incredible. someone who understands me. He sees my true potential, not just who I've been forced to be here. She paused, her gaze unwavering, almost challenging, completely devoid of any remorse or hesitation. His name is Julian. Julian Matthews. He's a visionary, a self-made millionaire in tech. He's starting a new company, a truly revolutionary venture, and he wants me to be a part of it. A major investor, a founding partner. I felt a chill spread through me, colder than any winter wind. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. A major investor? I asked, my voice flat, struggling to maintain composure. Sandra, you know we don't have that kind of liquid capital. Our savings are tied up in retirement funds and college plans. This isn't money we can just invest on a whim. She waved her hand dismissively, an impatient, arrogant gesture that made my blood run cold. That's exactly it, Jake. You're always so cautious, so small-minded. This isn't about small savings. It's about exponential growth. Julian says we can easily 10x our money in a year, maybe less. He's offering me a founding partner role, a chance to really be someone, to live the life I was meant to live. Her eyes gleamed with a feverish, almost predatory light. I'm leaving you, Jake. I'm taking our savings and investing them with Julian. We're starting a new life, a real life, a life of purpose and wealth. You can keep this stagnant existence if you want. My breath hitched in my throat. 15 years, 2 beautiful children, our modest home, our shared dreams, our sacrifices, our entire life, dismissed in a single, cruel monologue, delivered with an almost robotic detachment. She wasn't just leaving me. She was gutting our shared future, our children's future, for a man she'd known for a week and a pipe dream spun from smoke and mirrors. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly callous, so completely devoid of any empathy, that it momentarily paralyzed me. My mind, usually so sharp, felt blank, reeling from the sheer audacity of her plan. The world tilted on its axis. Our savings, I finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Sandra, that's not just your money. That's for the kids' college. That's for our retirement. It's everything we've built. She just shrugged again, a cold, indifferent gesture that sealed her fate in my eyes. They'll thank me when they're living in a mansion with a trust fund, instead of scraping by on your pathetic pension. It's for their future, Jake. A better future than you could ever provide. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation, the end of our marriage, the end of everything. I've already started the paperwork. I'm moving my share of the funds tomorrow. The divorce papers will be served next week. The moment she left the room, the fog of shock lifted, replaced by a laser-like focus, a cold, clinical certainty. My professional training kicked in. A self-made millionaire who wants a major investor from someone he just met at a conference? Whose first move is to break up a marriage and demand their entire life savings? And whose entire story sounds like a page ripped from the scam artist's handbook? That screams con artist in bold, flashing red letters. My intuition, honed by 2 decades of unearthing financial lies, was screaming. I went to my home office. There was no dramatic moment, no frantic hacking, no clandestine meetings with informants. It was simply a methodical, professional search, the kind I conducted every day for my job. I started with the name, Julian Matthews. I ran a quick background check using my extensive professional access to financial databases, corporate filings, public records, and litigation history. It took me less than 5 minutes to confirm my darkest suspicions. What I found was chillingly familiar, a well-worn path of deceit. Julian Matthews was an alias, a carefully constructed facade. His real name was Julian Vance. And he wasn't a millionaire. He was a career criminal, a serial con artist with a rap sheet as long as my arm. Multiple bankruptcies, SEC violations, charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny across 3 different states. He specialized in boiler room operations, seducing unsuspecting, often emotionally vulnerable and financially naive individuals, usually women of comfortable means, into investing their life savings in his revolutionary tech startups. These ventures invariably vanished, along with their money, leaving a trail of devastation. He was charismatic, plausible, and utterly ruthless. He had left a wake of ruined lives, and empty bank accounts in his wake, a ghost of broken dreams. My wife wasn't going to be his partner. She was going to be his next pay. And our entire life savings, our children's future, was about to become his next meal ticket. I leaned back in my chair, the screen of my monitor casting a pale glow on my face, a grim, heavy weight settling in my chest. I stared at the litany of his crimes, the pattern of his deceit, laid bare before me. I could have called her. I could have presented her with the irrefutable evidence, laid out his entire criminal history, exposed his aliases and his victims. I could have, with a few keystrokes and a phone call, stopped her. I could have saved her. But the image of her dismissive shrug, the cold, calculating look in her eyes as she talked about our children's better future without me, the casual cruelty of her betrayal, it all stopped me cold. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to believe the lie. She had chosen her path. And I, as her husband and now her soon-to-be ex, was no longer obligated to protect her from her own folly. My primary responsibility was to protect my children and myself. I just let her go. I decided, in that moment, that the most potent, most unassailable form of pro-revenge was simply to stand back and let her own choices, and Julian Vance's inevitable treachery, deliver the karma she so desperately deserved. I helped her pack her bags the next morning. My heart was breaking, a dull ache in my chest, but my face was a mask of calm, a carefully constructed facade mirroring her own. "Good luck, Sandra," I said, my voice even, as she got into a taxi with 2 oversized suitcases and a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk. She thought she was off to a new, exciting life of wealth and purpose. I knew she was off to the slaughter. My only priority now was the kids and protecting what little I could of our future. As a forensic accountant, I knew how to move quickly and legally, operating within the letter of the law. Before the divorce papers were officially served, and knowing her intent to drain the joint accounts, I carefully began securing my remaining assets. I transferred my entire pension, my personal savings, and all funds designated specifically for the kids' college into separate, irrevocable trust accounts. These accounts were solely in my name and the children's names, carefully structured to be legally untouchable by any divorce settlement. It was legal, preemptive, and completely airtight. When the divorce lawyer she had hired finally served the papers, he found that the life savings Sandra thought she was taking was actually only a fraction of our overall assets, mostly the liquid cash in our joint checking, which was intended for immediate bills and a small, easily replaced emergency fund. The real, substantial wealth, the long-term security, was untouchable, secured by my foresight and professional knowledge. Sandra had thought she had drained the well, but she had only siphoned off a puddle. For the next 2 months, I rebuilt my life, brick by painful brick. The house was quieter, lonelier, filled with an aching void, but also, paradoxically, more peaceful. The children, Emily and David, were confused and heartbroken by their mother's sudden departure, but with patient conversation, extra hugs, and consistent therapy, they slowly began to adjust. I explained to them, as gently and age-appropriately as I could, that Mommy was on an adventure and that I would always be there for them, a constant, unwavering presence. The immediate financial impact of Sandra's theft was painful, undoubtedly, but it was manageable. I picked up extra freelance work, tightened our household budget, and focused every ounce of my energy on providing a stable, loving home for my kids. And I waited. I knew it was only a matter of time. Julian Vance always followed the same pattern. He'd charm, he'd promise the moon, he'd take the money, and then he'd vanish. The timeline for his initial investment scams was usually between 1 to 3 months for the funds to be completely liquidated and his disappearance to occur. Sandra had given him every penny she had taken from me, plus her own small savings, a grand total of around $85,000. For Julian, it was a relatively small score, enough to sustain his luxurious lifestyle for a few months before he moved on to the next victim, the next city, the next alias. The call came late on a Tuesday night. My phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. I looked at it, and a cold certainty settled in my gut. It was from a Miami area code. I answered. It was Sandra. Her voice was thin, reedy, barely recognizable. She was crying. Hysterical. "Jake," she sobbed, her words barely coherent between gasps for air. "Jake, you have to help me. It's all gone. The money, everything. Julian, he disappeared. He took it all." I said nothing, just let her cries and gasps fill the charged silence on the line. The tears were real. The panic was genuine. The bottom had finally dropped out of her new, ambitious life. The dream she had so recklessly pursued had shattered, leaving her with nothing. "He just vanished," she choked out, her voice filled with a desperate, bewildered rage. "His phone is disconnected, his company website is gone, just a placeholder page. The luxury office building he claimed to lease, it's just a mail drop service. Jake, please, what do I do? I went to the police down here. They won't help. They said he's done this before, that it's just bad investment decisions, not fraud, because I willingly gave him the money. They said there's nothing they can do." Her words hit me with a familiar, chilling accuracy. That was Julian's MO exactly. He always operated in the gray areas of bad business deals and risky investments, making it look like the victim's own fault for poor judgment. He rarely faced immediate jail time for these scams, just moved on to the next state, the next alias, the next unsuspecting Jake. The police, dealing with countless similar cases, often had their hands tied when victims willingly, albeit foolishly, signed over funds. "Sandra," I said, my voice calm, flat, utterly devoid of emotion, a professional delivering an unavoidable verdict. "What did you expect? You left me for him. You accused me of being stagnant and small-minded. You stole our children's future to invest in his revolutionary venture. You dismissed every caution, every rational thought. You wanted to believe the lie he sold you." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end of the line, followed by a long, shuddering sob. But you're a forensic accountant, Jake," she pleaded. A desperate, last-ditch attempt to shift blame, to manipulate me one last time. "You could have warned me. You could have stopped me. You knew what he was." The accusation in her voice was raw, desperate, but also laced with a self-serving fury. "I did," I replied, the truth hanging in the air like a hard stone. "I tried to warn you, for months, with every conversation I attempted about our finances, about your sudden changes. But you called me stagnant, cautious, boring, small-minded. You wanted to believe in the millionaire. You wanted to believe in the fantasy he was selling you. My job, Sandra, is to find the truth in the numbers, not to force people to see it when they are determined to be blind." There was a long, painful silence, punctuated only by her ragged breathing and the occasional sniffle. I could almost picture her, alone in some cheap Miami hotel room, the weight of her choices, the crushing reality of her self-inflicted ruin, finally upon her. "I have nowhere to go, Jake," she finally whispered, her voice broken, stripped of all its former arrogance. "No money, no job. Julian left me completely broke. Can I come home?" My jaw tightened, a muscle clenching in my cheek. "Home," I repeated, the word tasting bitter, hollow. "Sandra, you sold your share of the home when you left for your soulmate. You emptied the accounts. You severed ties with this family. There is no home for you here. Not anymore. This is my home and the children's home. You gave that up." "But the kids," she pleaded, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to manipulate me, to leverage the children she had abandoned. "They need their mother. They miss me." "The kids are here, Sandra," I said, my voice unwavering, devoid of any weakness. "They are safe. They are loved. They are being taken care of by the father you dismissed as stagnant and small-minded." Their future, thanks to my stagnant foresight and careful planning, is secure. Their college funds are untouched. Their well-being is and always will be my priority. You chose your path. Now you have to walk it. I paused, letting the full, brutal finality of my words sink in, a silence so complete it felt like an ending. I wish you the best, Sandra, I said, using her own words against her, with your new life. And then I hung up. I muted my phone, then blocked her number. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. The silence that followed was heavy, profound, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the quiet, steady rhythm of my own breathing, the soft, comforting sounds of my children sleeping down the hall. There was no joy in her suffering, no triumphant glee, only a profound, necessary sense of closure, a quiet satisfaction that justice, in its own slow, inevitable way, had been served. She had chosen greed over loyalty, fantasy over reality. And the universe, with a little help from a con artist and my quiet vigilance, had delivered her the exact future she had so carelessly, so cruelly, chosen for herself. The next day, I called my lawyer. I explained the situation, the frantic call, the disappearance of Julian Vance. She recommended a few legal avenues for Sandra to pursue, mostly related to reporting to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and various state consumer protection agencies, though she warned me, as I already knew, that the chances of recovery were slim to none. I forwarded the relevant information to Sandra in a polite, purely factual email, ensuring it was a one-way communication. I had done what I could, legally and professionally. My personal obligations to her were over. The kids still miss their mother, and that's a wound that will never fully heal, but they are resilient. We talk about it, openly and honestly, in age-appropriate ways, without disparaging Sandra, but always reinforcing the importance of truth and consequences. Months later, I saw a small article in the local paper, buried deep in the financial section. Local woman among victims of alleged nationwide investment fraud. There was a blurred photo of Sandra, looking gaunt, defeated, and utterly lost, being interviewed by a reporter outside a police station. Julian Vance, under yet another alias, had finally been apprehended in a different state, thanks to the combined efforts of multiple victims and a multi-state task force, none of whom were my wife, for his continued scams. He had been running his operations for over 2 decades. His capture was a minor victory for justice, but for Sandra, it was far too late. Sandra finally understood the true cost of her ambition, the devastating value of the quiet, stable life she had so casually dismissed and destroyed. She had wanted to be a major investor, a founding partner in a glamorous new venture, rubbing shoulders with millionaires. Instead, she had become a cautionary tale, another name on a long list of victims, her greed and arrogance a blinding spotlight on her own folly. She had left me for a millionaire and stolen our savings. She had no idea that I ran his credit, that I knew he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator targeting her weakness, and I chose to let her learn the hard way. Sometimes, the most potent payback is simply standing back and letting someone's own choices be their undoing. The money was gone, but my peace and my children's future was secure. That, for me, was the only true victory.